Hello, I'm Kimberly Corp.
And I'm Katherine Corp.
And we're the owners of Pilates on 5th here in New York City and the creators of Pilates on 5th online. Today we're here to talk to you about stretching.
We love stretching. We really love stretching.
Yes, and stretching is actually good for you. And if you look at your pets, like your dog wakes up in the morning and literally does its little downward dog and upward dog. If you watch little cats play. Yeah, they do all of their little things. And I mean, think if you go to the zoo, I happen to love the Central Park Zoo, primates, which we are, tend to sit like, they have loose hips, they have loose bodies, they have loose lower backs. So if the literature out there on stretching confuses you, you're not alone.
Right.
It confuses everybody.
Right, and whatever thesis you have about stretching, you'll find something to support you, and your friend, or 10 friends, will also find their thesis supported, and then you can all argue about it for days.
For days, and so there's a lot of conflicting information out there. Some people say never stretch, some people say do stretch. So we're just going to give you some do's and don'ts of stretching. So if it helps, think of stretching as restoring the length to a muscle, or maintaining the length of a muscle, or releasing tension, or something. If the word stretching freaks you out, just
Right,
shift
stretching
it.
doesn't always have to be increasing the length of the muscle or gaining more flexibility. It could just be restoring.
Right. So before we start with the do's and don'ts, we want to go over the two types of stretching that are out there and people tend to agree upon. There is static stretching. So Catherine's going to do an example. She's going to put her leg up and just leaning over here. Now nothing's happening. So that is static. It'd be the same thing, let's say you've been typing a lot. If I were just to hold my wrist like this, I am statically stretching, so I'm just holding. So that is static. Dynamic would be if she does leg swing. So she's lengthening as she does this, the more of the origin end of the hamstring, but the length, as opposed to just, likewise with my example here, if I do this and I'm constantly moving my wrist through the range, that is much more dynamic. So by definition, dynamic is moving through a range of motion repetitively, and static, if I'm going to hold on to you, is just holding there. Right?
Yes.
Right. Okay, so the do's and don'ts regarding dynamic and static stretching. Do stretch dynamically before a workout. So let's just take the shoulder. Let's pretend you're doing a shoulder sport. Let's show an example of a dynamic stretch would be mobilizing the shoulder joint, whether it's tennis, it's golf, so you can do forward, back. You need to be able to move in all directions. Swimming is another example. So those would be dynamic stretches. But do not stretch ballistically. So is there something you can do ballistic that you won't hurt yourself? Yeah. Okay. So, right. You're not going to just like whack. It's all about controlled movement through a continuous range of motion.
And when you watch Olympic swimmers before their race, they're doing a thing where they hit. Apparently, Michael Phelps can hit his hands together because his arms are so long. But that's not the first thing he did.
Right. He didn't wake up.
He warmed up before he got to the pool.
Right.
Before he did that. So that's just part of the flexibility that he already acquired. So you never want to do something like that first.
Right. And another example is obviously golf requires rotation. I'll just pick golf because that's a recreational sport that many older people enjoy, and it is harder to stay flexible as you get older.
Yes.
Yes, sadly.
We know a lot about that.
Yeah. You can just swing gently, but you'd never want someone to be like, ugh. Right. I hope that's clear what the difference is. You're not going to ballistic. The other one you don't want to do ballistically, I see this a lot with runners on the street because we live in New York. Kevin, cross your ankles and do it wrong, where you're just going to, and turn so they can see you from the side. Yeah. So you don't want to just be thrusting your body. That would be ballistic as well.
You're putting a lot of strain on your lower back.
Right.
Position. I'm doing it. You want to do it before that.
Yes, but that's coming up. She is jumping ahead from our do's and don'ts. So our first do was do stretch dynamically before a workout, but do not stretch ballistically. Second do and don't is do stretch statically after a workout, because your muscles are nice and warm and you can use it to increase muscle length if that's your goal. And there are many sports that require longer muscles. Just think of a baseball pitcher. I'm left-handed, so when he goes back here, his arm is almost like in a position you've never seen.
I see some of the pictures. I'm like,
but before he pitches, I'm sure he doesn't sit in this position.
Because then you have no strength.
Right.
To Kimberly's point, if you stretch a muscle for a really long time, then it can't fire to its optimal strength for 30 minutes after after this stretch.
Right. So it's very important that afterwards, after a workout is when you increase the length of a muscle, not before, because you become kind of noodly. We have a story of before a performance, a prop, we were on tour, a prop got stuck in the stage door. So we started stretching at the usual time before, as a warm-up before the show.
45 minutes later, we were like,
And when it was time to get on stage, we were both like,
we felt like the Scarecrow and the Wizard of Oz.
yeah.
We had no,
So we have experienced that firsthand, and it wasn't good because I felt like I was like, whose body is this? Because it's not mine, and I have no control over it at all.
do that before you go to bed.
Yes, before going to bed is good. But do not hold stretches longer than 30 to 60 seconds. So again, conflicting information. People say 30 seconds, people say 60, but I've never seen anyone say hold it for 5 minutes.
Right.
And our little dancer clients get into trouble here. They'll like, excuse me, sorry. They'll do this, and they'll like go and do it, and just, yeah. And one girl told me she was there for like, she's like, well, I hold it for 3 minutes. It's probably not a good idea. So if you have a child or a friend's child that's in rhythmic gymnastics or something, it's a different sport. You can let them handle that. But for the average human being, do not hold stretches longer than 60 seconds because it's never good.
And I think some of the reason they say 30 to 60 seconds is when you're counting, most of us can't count exact seconds.
Right. Like I figured out that when I count to 30, it's really 20. But you know, and again, stretching shouldn't be punitive, but I think we all think of it that way. Okay. Next, when possible, and we're going to have Katherine lie down, you want to stretch with gravity. So that is a do, stretch with gravity. So she's going to pick her leg up and pull it toward her. Now, the don't still apply. She's not going to yank her leg. Do use a band or a towel or something. If let's say she doesn't have flexibility here. So that way you're supporting the weight of your leg, you're keeping tension in your arms to hold the weight of the leg, and you're keeping this knee straight. So a don't is don't flex the knee or bend the knee or whatever you're fixing. Just because the leg looks higher, this is actually not better for you. So the do is always stretch with proper biomechanics, which we'll go over in different positions later. But do use a band or a towel to help you out and provide the level of support needed to let the muscle relax. But don't yank, because that'd be ballistic. So just yank a little bit. That is ballistic again. So again, you can do it dynamically, so lower and lift. So see the difference? Can you do a few more? This is dynamic. And now do a fake ballistic without hurting yourself. Yank, 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 ballistic. So I hope the difference is pretty clear. So when possible, stretch with gravity. Let's show shoulders here as well. So she's just going to stack her knees. And then you could stretch, this would be stretching posterior deltoid and whatnot. That's good. Or yeah, and opening up, stretching pecs, because then you can just let gravity open you up. It can be quite nice. If you have a foam roller, you could lie on your foam roller and let your arms fall open to get past the floor. So go ahead and sit up. I'm going to make Katherine do all the hard stuff. Stand up. What you don't want to do, though, is you never want to, I'll just do this one, hang off of something. Because if you do this, see how a lot of people do a calf stretch this way. But this isn't good. Even it feels great, I'll tell you that right now. It feels great, but I'm asking my calf muscle to both support my body weight and stretch at the same time.
Muscles don't like it.
Yeah, the muscle gets confused. It's like, well, do you want me to hold you up or do you want me to stretch? Right. So as an example, and Katherine, I'll be nice and let you do this one.
Thank you.
Example, notice that if she's here, she can keep her heel down and rock forward, and that way the body weight is supported by this little triangle and the floor, and that will allow the muscle to release and without having to support the entire weight of the body. So yes, that's very important. So that's the other thing about gravity. So those were oh no, you're going to go back down.
Okay.
Down you go. This is a no of gravity.
Okay.
Go into a forward lunge, yep, and with the left foot forward. So what you want to be careful of here is if, we said do let gravity help you when possible, but this would be an example if you're really pushing yourself forward, you can be sitting into the anterior capsule of the hip, and actually your muscles kind of slide over, and you end up just stretching the capsule of the hip, and you're really not stretching psoas or hip flexors. flexors. So especially if you're bending your knee. So be careful when stretching with gravity to support yourself. And that brings up the point of yoga, which is great. So yoga is great. And some people see yoga as just stretching, but they're always in controlled poses. So Kevin, go into a yoga pose, you know. Yeah.
And if we don't teach yoga, so if you're a yogi out there and you have a critique of my
knock yourself out.
Yeah.
But basically, she's holding this pose, but energetically, she's reaching one way and the other, so it's always a supported. Right. Do you see the difference? So that's sinking, and then she's just lift out. So if ever you're concerned about whether or not you're doing something right, A, ask your teacher, but B, if it's a crowded class or you don't feel comfortable asking your teacher, if you feel like you're sitting in your joint, pull back a little and just like pull out of it, even just a millimeter, so that you know you are lifted out of the stretch.
You should be master and commander.
Yes.
Your pose.
So that's another do and don't. Do stretch muscles and don't stretch ligaments.
Right, and the same thing is if you're doing a shoulder stretch. We see a lot of people do shoulder stretches and they just do this.
And they collapse here.
Collapsing here. You actually may or may not be stretching a lot, but you're definitely pushing the anterior capsule of the shoulder, the head of the humerus forward in the anterior capsule. It's better, and you get a better stretch if you try to round your upper back and then lean forward.
Yeah, because you get a much better stretch through here. So that's one thing that's very important, is you always want to maintain support, and you don't want to stretch ligaments. So I'll just use my bicep as an example. This, they're scrawny, but go with me here. This is the belly of the muscle, and you always want to kind of feel it in the belly. Once you start feeling it a lot on one end or the other, then you probably are getting closer to the ligaments, and so you should be careful and just be mindful of where you are. So you want to be careful and stretch just the belly and just the full length of the muscle. You want to stay away from like ligaments and too much of it. You can stretch tendons because tendons attach the muscles to the bones, but you don't want to get into like the ligaments are attaching bone to bone.
Right. And so they don't bounce back like the muscles.
Right.
Muscles are more like taffy, like you pull it back and it comes back. Well, taffy may not be the best example either because it kind of stretches.
Well, no, it stretches and stays. It's like your old underwear, like the elastic in an old pair of underwear that you put on and you're like, oh, this is real attractive.
You still want suppleness to it. You don't want it to go, stretch and then stay there. You want it. There needs to be a pliability.
Yes. And because Katherine demonstrated a shoulder stretch here, one thing, and go into it with your elbows on them, if you're stretching in a forward bend, it is so much better to support your body, your upper body, and keep your back straight. And right here, she's going to think of lifting her tailbone to the ceiling. So what you do what you shouldn't do, because is you collapse over. Oh, no, not that. Collapse over and just hang. This is contraindicated, like everywhere it's written. And I know a lot of us women brush our hair by throwing ourselves over like this, but technically it's contraindicated. And that's why they always say bend your knees to roll up. So if you want to stretch the back here, it's nice to be supported and lift up. And then if you want to go down, you can put your hands on something, and that way you're supporting your torso and you're not just hanging the weight of your torso and forcing these poor muscles and ligaments down there to just lengthen and stretch.
Right.
And then I think lastly, 2 points we'd like to make. Stretching should feel good.
Yes.
It should feel like a good massage where there are some ouchy, sensitive
It should
points.
feel like a reward for hard work done.
Yeah.
Or something. It should not feel punitive.
Yeah, exactly. And it should definitely be something that you're like, oh, I felt so good after doing that, I'm going to do it again. So, you wouldn't stay in a massage if it was agony.
Right.
So if you're stretching and it's agony, then you're probably overdoing it. So a good rule of thumb is if it doesn't feel good, it probably isn't good for you. One thing, we just did a high heel video. If you wear heels a lot, you definitely want to both stretch soleus and gastrocnemius. So soleus, you have to bend the knee, and that can be really nice. It'll feel really great the next day, trust me. And the other part about stretching is you really have to start to learn to listen to your body.
Yes.
Because there is a fine line between balancing strength and flexibility, and it's different for each person because people have a different composition of muscle fibers.
Exactly. It's like some people are built with more laxity in their joints, and some people are built with joints that are tighter. So if you're in a class with someone and the person next to you is like super, super flexible, don't try to compete with them.
Right.
It's not competitive stretching. Just respect your own body and what your limitations are, because your limitations also end up being your strengths, and so they could envy you for whatever you have.
Right.
For you.
And if you sit all day, then probably, if you're here all day, your muscles around your hips are both tight and weak. So you probably need to balance strength and flexibility in your hips more than you might for other joints, just because if you're sitting all day, then your glutes, all these are just inhibited. They're doing nothing because you're sitting on them. So getting up and just stretching and not doing some strengthening is probably not the best. But again, it's different for each person, and start to listen and think, okay, how did I feel and what should I do? And I believe that covers our do's and don'ts for stretching.
Yes, we have 2 new total body tuning workouts that combine Pilates and some of our unique exercises with stretching. Kimberly tried them out on me. They're good. So check those out at Pilates on Fifth Online.
.com. Bye.